We ask the questions. What is needed in the world? Is that going
to be? Darfur, a graveyard for hundreds of thousands of people. More than 2.7 million displaced. The result of a 10-year-long conflict between the government of Sudan and rebels in the western region who claim they're being pushed out by the government's pro-Arab policies.
See all the kids here, look over here. Take a look over here, this is everybody's name.
Soon after its most deadly chapter, international attention was solid. Now, the celebrities are mostly gone. Agreements, however, still come and go. The most recent one was signed in Doha last year, but didn't include the main warring factions. But throughout this, the problems remain, and so do the peacekeepers. Mandated by the United Nations and the African Union, UNAMID is the largest peacekeeping force in the world. Its job is noble but difficult: to protect civilians, support the peace process, promote human rights and freedoms. Its chief, the experienced Nigerian diplomat Ibrahim Gambari, no stranger to dealing with tough political conflicts, has been on assignments in Myanmar, Angola, and Iraq. But this does not exempt him from being criticized. For example, some question his relations with Sudan's President Omar al-Bashir. Should a top UN envoy be mingling with a president that's wanted for war crimes? Now, one of Africa's most experienced diplomats, the man responsible for upholding peace in Darfur, opens up to talk to Al Jazeera. Ibrahim Gambari, thank you very much for talking to Al Jazeera.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
A year on from the signing of the Doha document for peace in Darfur, what progress has been made to achieve comprehensive and sustainable peace in Darfur?
Of course, this is an agreement between the parties. The role of the UN and the African Union mission is to help them to implement it, and there's been some progress. For example, the DRA, Darfur Regional Authority, is now in place. It was inaugurated 8th of February. Dr. Tijani Sisi is chairman of it. There have been some challenges in terms of funding, in terms of really settling, but then,
it also has very little powers, from what I understand.
Well, the powers are actually bigger than the powers provided for the Transitional Darfurian Regional Authority, which was set up under the previous agreement called the Darfur Peace Agreement, signed in Lagos, the capital of my own, in Abuja, my own capital. But nonetheless, it should be given a chance. It will be given a chance, and there's a recognition now that people are counting not from the 8th of January, February when it was inaugurated, but from almost a year ago when this was signed. So they have to have something delivered on the ground.
Now, does this peace deal signed here in Qatar mean anything on the ground in Darfur? We're still seeing rebel groups engaged in military operations and the Sudanese government bombing their suspected locations. So what change has there been on the ground since the signing of this?
Well, that's the second part of your earlier question, which is how to bring the armed movement who have not signed the agreement to be in, because as long as they are not there, then it means they are not committed to a ceasefire. They are not committed to stopping the fighting, and it is the role of the international community to try to encourage, pressure, whatever, to get the armed movement to sign on to the peace process.
So in essence, the absence of these armed rebel groups, you're talking about, of course, the Justice and Equality Movement, GEM, and the SLA factions of Mini Minawi and Abdel Wahid, right? They haven't signed this agreement. Doesn't it undermine it? Because the agreement that was signed was with the Liberty and Justice Movement, which doesn't have a lot of military or political influence on the ground in Darfur, and doesn't have a lot of has very little support, I should say, with among the Darfuris on the ground.
But the people of Darfur are fed up with this war. They really are very hopeful for peace, and they see it because we've had 98 workshops to try to disseminate this document, the Doha document for peace in Darfur. And over, I think, almost 20,000 people have attended. It is very clear that imperfect as these agreements may be, in terms of its non-inclusiveness, the people want peace and they want to give it a chance. So the challenge now is to actually make the DRA work and to have them deliver some tangible results on the ground. Because I feel that if that is the case, and the government is now stepping up to the plate, the Qataris are helping, the League of Arab States, the Islamic Development Bank, even the African Development Bank, to do projects that touch the lives of the people, to make the DRA deliver on its promise. So if those happen, and I think there's a better chance now than before, it will be difficult to recruit Darfurians to continue this war.
What about Khartoum? How committed, how sincere do you think the Khartoum government is in pacifying Darfur? I mean, there are still aerial bombardments that are going on, led by the Sudanese armed forces. Don't you fear that by claiming that it's legitimately involved in this peace process, the Khartoum government is in fact perhaps just stalling for time and feels that it has perhaps carte blanche to do whatever it wants in Darfur without any international criticism or oversight?
Well, first of all, there is no carte blanche because you have UNAMID on the ground. We have 30,000 people, 18,000 military,
but the aerial bombardments are still continuing.
But this is reported, and many times I even make public statement criticizing it. But let us
despite the criticism, they continue.
Let me just take a step back. In 2006, when the Darfur peace agreement was signed in Abuja, it is said, I think with justification, that there was not much political will on the part of the government, but they had money. Now, the challenge now is that with the DDPD, the will is there,
but the money
is not there. Now, and the will has been, in fact, emphasized only recently when the President of the Republic set up a high-level committee of which he's the chair to try to see to the implementation of the DDPD, because they also see that you cannot, they have the challenges in Darfur, then you have challenges in Kordofan and South Kordofan, Blue Nile. They have challenges in their relationship with South Sudan. I mean, it is in their best interest to really bring the conflict in Darfur to an end, rather than to have to fight on multiple fronts.
I want to address the humanitarian situation in Darfur because it's a very important aspect, of course. But just before we do that, just on one of the points of the agreement, which is the disarmament and reintegration of militias in Darfur, the Sudanese government has said it submitted a comprehensive plan for this. But any substantial progress made on this?
Yes,
who are they going to disarm? Well, since the fighting is still going on.
They had a disagreement, the Doha document for peace in Darfur, and it was the duty of the UNAMID as chair of the ceasefire commission, which is chaired by my force commander, and I chair the joint commission. Our job is to see to the implementation of the ceasefire agreement, to verify the location of the troops, because that's the first step. You have to find out how many troops on each side, how many militia are we talking about, and then the next step will be the security arrangement for cantonment.
So what's been implemented on the security arrangements?
So far, we've just completed the verification exercise. That is between the government and the LGM. The challenge now is to move to the next stage, which is to have cantonment, which is to now have demobilization, disarmament. But even that is one aspect. The other aspect is to get the armed movement that are outside of the peace process to join in, because you cannot have a comprehensive disarmament, comprehensive demobilization of all militias without having those armed movement that are outside of the peace process to come in.
Indeed. Now, you mentioned Khartoum's commitment, you say, this time to pacifying Darfur. You say it's different than in 2006. If that's the case, then why are they refusing to allow humanitarian aid into the region? MSF, Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, has had to cut down some of its operations in the areas where rebels are active because medicines, drugs are not reaching those areas. The Khartoum government apparently is restricting aid from getting in. What is the UN and African Union mission doing to convince Khartoum to allow this aid?
You know, we in UNAMID, United Nations African Mission, we have so far the status of force agreement with the government, and we insist on our movements and patrols not being restricted. And one of our key mandates is, apart from protecting the civilian population, is to facilitate the delivery of humanitarian assistance. We have been fighting any restriction on our side, mostly by the government, but sometimes by the armed movement. Now, but the area that we are talking about is a limited one. It's called Jebel Mara. And a year ago, I launched something called Operation Spring Basket, where I myself, I'm not a military man, but I led a team of military and police and humanitarian to enter this area, having negotiated with both the government and the armed movement, and we delivered the much needed humanitarian assistance. We intend to do the same thing.
I want to talk about the IDPs, the internally displaced people, an estimated 2 million of them. Under the agreement in Doha, it said that they have the right to return voluntarily and safety and in dignity. Now, we know that this is a priority for the Khartoum government, the closure of the IDP camps, but are the conditions in place to allow for the IDPs to return? Are their villages secure, for instance?
Three things that needs to happen. First, security. That's the job of UNAMID, working with the local authorities and the central government. The second is the provision of physical infrastructures and social infrastructures, clinics and schools, and above all, the means of livelihood. Now, with the best of times, it is not possible for DRA or the government of Khartoum to be able to have the money to massively invest in all these three aspects of needs, but that's why we're calling on the international community, the traditional donors, the non-traditional donors to see the best they can, the League of Arab States, the Qatar government, the Islamic Development Bank, the African Development Bank, to make resources available.
How do you make sure that that money gets to the people who need it the most? Because there have been accusations that millions of dollars of Darfur relief aid have not been dispersed properly. So the Darfur Regional Authority that you've been talking about was set up earlier, and its chairman says there is no money. Where is the money that was committed, that was pledged to Darfur all these years? Where has it gone to?
Well, two aspects to that. First, there's a difference between pledge and disbursement. Let me tell you a practical example. UNAMID had an international water conference, which we called International Water for Peace, because water being one of the root causes of the conflict in Darfur, that we felt addressing it will really contribute to peace in Darfur. Now, we had 67 bankable projects. Half $1 billion were pledged. That was June last year. We have not seen a dime. So there's a difference between... So out of the
money that was pledged for Darfur, how much
not a single one for the water. But what we are saying now, the time has come to begin to shift, to have a transition from humanitarian assistance to early recovery and development. That is where real money will come. And the Qatarian government have done two things. First, they have pledged to set up a bank, and this is where accountability comes from. And then the Qataris are planning an international donor conference for Darfur towards the end of this year.
But in the money that has gone to relief, for instance, the IDPs are saying that the humanitarian situation is still very dire. They say that only 10% of them receive food rations. So where is the rest of the money going? It's
not the money, it's WFP, the World Food Program. They're the ones that have cut back on their rations. And what the IDPs are complaining about is not lack of ration, but inadequate and simply because in the climate of this international financial situation all over the world, the NGOs, international NGOs, and some of these agencies are not getting the kind of money that they used to get to run their operations. So I'm afraid the people of Darfur are also a victim of some of these downturn in the international financial situation.
The UNAMID mission expenses around $2 billion on this Darfur, $2 billion a year.
No, 1.7.
Close to $2 billion.
Well, it's a lot of difference between 1.7 and 2 billion. But
all
still,
right, close to $2 billion a year for Darfur. Do you think the money is being used efficiently?
Oh, absolutely, because people don't realize that Darfur is twice the size of the United Kingdom, the same size as France, with little or no infrastructure. So first is the infrastructure, the logistics. Secondly, you have to pay, we have 18,000 troops, 6,000 policemen, the rest are civilians. And then also for the services that we provide, for example, close to 600 million is being spent every year, pumped into the economy of Darfur, employing people, some local contractors. All these have impact.
Now, the United Nations, Mr. Gambari, has confirmed to the non-profit public interest organization Inner City Press that you spent $620,000 to build your house in Darfur and some $65,000 on furnishings. Does this money come from the UNAMID budget as well?
I guess it does, but it's not my house. I think it's very important for you to know that it is not my house. This was planned before I came. It will be there after I leave, and it is.
But 620,000.
But if you, we have a budget of close to 2 billion. But what we are saying is that this is not my house. This belongs to UNAMI. This is a representational house, so that when we have guests, we accommodate them there. I'm not living there alone. I have all kinds of other staff members.
5
who are
staff
there.
members, I believe.
Yeah, and I pay rent. And now, let them also find out which other head of mission in what they consider to be hazardous missions, like Iran, like, Iraq, like Afghanistan, actually pay rent. And in any case, how about other missions where they're actually renting houses, which cost a lot of money?
The message is, you have a UN, the head of a UN mission living in what has been described as a mansion, and IDPs cramped in camps. I mean, does it send a good message?
First of all, I have been living in what they call container for about a year. This was planned before my time. It will continue to be there after my time, and it is a representational house for those who come to visit Darfur.
Now, the humanitarian crisis in Darfur, as we've said, has received plenty of media attention in the last few years because perhaps, and thanks to the voice of some of Hollywood's elite. But lately, it's not making the headlines anymore. Why do you think this is? You that's in the corridors of power and diplomacy, do you sense that there's perhaps a certain Darfur fatigue within the international community?
Well, I hope there's no fatigue, because there's no peace in the broad comprehensive sense, in that we still have armed movement that are not signed on to peace, but because there are other problems elsewhere, it makes Darfur one of the more peaceful parts of the old Sudan. And when there's no crisis, no major wars, the attention of the international community tends to shift elsewhere. I want to say to you that until the recent fighting between the North and the South, actually Darfur was relatively peaceful, because if you compare the number of fatalities arising from direct conflict between the government and the armed movement, or even conflict over resources between farmers and the nomads, that has dropped by almost 70%.
I'd like to talk about your career a bit more, Mr. Gambari. You're a veteran of UN missions from Zimbabwe to Myanmar, from Cyprus to Angola. And Foreign Policy magazine, interestingly, has described you as the UN's dictator envoy. How do you feel about that? Do you think that you're a specialist of dictators?
Well, I as long as they don't say I'm a favorite of dictators, well, I'm fine. But
we'll
I just want to say that I joined the United Nations because I believed in its principle. I've served 10 years as the ambassador of my country, which is the longest, and I was asked by Mr. Kofi Annan to join the Secretariat, and I'm an international civil servant. I just go wherever the Secretariat decides that something needs to be done. And if they feel that I have built an experience in dealing with difficult regimes, I prefer to call difficult regimes, then I feel honored that I'm the one chosen to deal, because somebody has to, the UN has to talk to everybody.
But what do you think makes you a good mediator? How are you able to move between these two worlds of authoritarianism and liberal democracy?
Well, because I feel that there's not a single one-size-fits-all for every country in terms of the process of democratization. And what I do when I talk to what I prefer to call difficult regimes, or regimes that are regarded as pariah state by the international community, is to open a line of communication, because you have to talk to them. Now, if we hadn't talked to, for example, the regime in Myanmar, in Burma, would we be where we are today? So somebody has to lay the building blocks. Somebody has to test the waters. Somebody has to try to persuade those in authority that there is a path to respectability in the international community. And maybe myself, because I'm from Nigeria, I've worked with several military rulers, that I think I have some sense of the mentality, and therefore could talk to them perhaps in ways that might be more difficult by those who don't have that experience.
All right, now on January 20th of this year, of 2012, You were seen in a Khartoum hotel hugging Sudan's President Omar al-Bashir at the wedding of Chadian President Idris Deby with the daughter of the Janjaweed leader Musa Hilal. Should a top UN envoy be mingling with a president that's wanted for war crimes?
First of all, I was invited to this wedding by the president of Chad, whose agreement with the president of Sudan has brought peace and stability to West Darfur to extend that people are now IDPs are moving slowly but steadily from South Darfur to the west, from East Chad to West Darfur. I had no control over who else will be in that meeting, and there's no question
but do you regret,
hugging
Omar al-Bashir?
No, it's not hugging and kissing. I have, as an African, as a Muslim, I have no other choice than to say hello to the president of a country in which I have 30,000 people. But after having said that, I don't have any further word to say on that.
But I know, regardless, your presence at that wedding, won't you agree, sends a bad message to the victims of war crimes in Darfur and undermines the UN's credibility, doesn't it?
I can understand the feelings of people on this, but I don't have any further words to say on that particular incident.
All right, let's talk about your country, Nigeria, if we can. The militant group Boko Haram is a major potential threat, not just for Nigeria, but for other countries in the region. It's carried out a number of attacks in recent months. The United States believes, in fact, that it's potentially allied with al-Qaeda and wants it put on the list of terrorist organizations. But the Nigerian government has been reluctant to do this. They want to dialogue, negotiate with Boko Haram. Do you think that the insurgency can end with dialogue?
Well, first of all, when speaking about Nigeria, I speak in my personal capacity, not as a UN official, a Nigerian that is concerned with the peace and stability of his country. Because after all, with all these experiences that I've had over the years, ultimately, Nigeria is the only country that I can call my own, in the words of one of the former leaders. And so I have to think about it. I have to work with others to bring peace and stability to Nigeria. I think this is not the first time that we've had this kind of insurrection, this type of thing in Nigeria. However, this is the first time that we have what we call suicide bombers. People used to say that Nigerians love life too much to be suicide bombers, but something has happened. There's some...
What's happened? What's changed?
I think there are about three dimensions. There are those who feel genuinely aggrieved, that they feel there's no other alternative than to pursue the line of action they have. Then there are those who use those who feel they are aggrieved. And politicians in Nigeria, I'm sorry to say, have found movements such as this to use for electoral advantage, and then they create monsters that they find difficult to control. And then there are those who are just simply criminals, who use these as opportunities to perpetuate criminal activities. But complicating
the situation also is the corruption within the Nigerian security system, isn't it?
Well, a lot of money is going to the security apparatus. I wish there was corresponding gain in the amount of money that is being spent. But this Boko Haram should be seen as a national emergency that requires all hands, all talents to come for the sake of their country, because we Nigerians talk of themselves being the giant of Africa. They've played a role in African affairs that was an example to many. We don't want to see Nigeria being reduced to this state where there's insecurity and where there are all kinds of extremism that we didn't know before.
Do you have any political ambitions in your country, Nigeria? Any presidential ambitions, perhaps, for 2015? You know,
2015 is a long way away. In politics, they say 1 week is eternity. I've not been thinking that far ahead. But one thing is clear. I am prepared to serve my people in whatever capacity that they deem appropriate, bearing in mind my experience, my contact, my service to Nigeria, not just to the United Nations and to the African Union.
Are you going to be candidate in 2015?
That is something that is not in my hands, and it's too early to say.
Okay, Mr. Gambari, thank you very much indeed for talking to Al Jazeera.
It's always my pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks for your time. Very good.